pull up the slides that I was going to share with you today. Just a couple of slides to kick us off. So let me know when you can see the slide.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is just a cover slide. So what I've done is design based on the feedback that that everyone shared. I have a principle in how we grow the business of go where the water runs. It's, you know, given that we're all about helping people be true to their natural instincts, I like to look at that approach with the business as well, and going where the water flows means instead of trying to direct it all, go with what the customer demands or you know asks for. And so at the moment, there's been a lot of discussion from the previous webinars around, for example, understanding the whole ID. Previously, for the last 8 weeks, we've done instinct by instinct or direction by direction. And what people have been saying is, can we understand the whole ID and the differences between them? So some of that's around different instincts, like how can you be a verifier and also, you know, an improviser, for example. But sometimes the questions have been around how does this ID collaborate with this ID, you know, and work together with those differences. So we'll try and cover both of those today, as well as the differences in intensities. But I'm really happy for this session today to go with where the water flows. This will be much more interactive. So if you have questions about your own ID, or, you know, so you might be sort of thinking, I'm struggling to understand how I can be this instinct and also another instinct, or you might have that question about someone close to you, for example, feel or get ready to throw them out, because we are going to go very much with your questions and inputs today. A couple of things in terms of housekeeping. We showed a collective ID of the group. What's interesting is we've got quite a different mix this week to last week. I think there's about 25 or more new people who haven't even been to our webinars before. And yet the makeup of the group this week is almost identical to the makeup that we had last week. So we look at this to then determine how we might adjust the facilitation of the webinar. This is the collective ID of everyone on the call. And this, you know, we're seeing every week there's a fairly good representation. The second protocol is to just check yourselves, and we call this the peak performance indicator. The green arrow here is your ID. When you are true to your ID, you get those benefits and rewards at the top of the arrows. That's when you're going to give your very best performance, which includes things like making your best decisions. It's when you're going to operate with least stress and have your greatest confidence and self-esteem. And I will say all of these things are symbiotic, meaning you can't have one without the other. So when people are under a great deal of stress and they say, but it's not affecting my productivity, you know, I get that it may not be affecting productivity or health or energy or confidence in your mind right now, but often it's not until you get to the other side of the stress and you look back and you go, oh my God, I can only now see the impact it was having. So it's a cool thing to know that this is like a formula that goes together. So if you are feeling stress, not only is your performance down, but it's eroding away at your confidence and self-esteem and health as well. And then of course, what happens is you get pulled off stride here off to the left or right. You not only miss out on the benefits of being in stride, you start to experience various forms of stress and distress along the bottom axis. And the greater the pull out of stride, the more that stress builds up to the point where it takes its toll in a very physical way. And unless you're doing something like, you know, medication or making a serious life change to get back in stride, then it can get really quite catastrophic. So I think this is just, you know, to me, it's probably the favorite slide I have of all slides I could show. The one I would continually talk to is this one, because it represents, I think, the essence of knowing thyself, being true to yourself, and having strategies to help you do that, which is what we stand for. So I think it's really valuable each day to just do a little check and say, what's on a scale of 0 to 10? If 10 is me right on this center line here, totally in stride, and a 0 or a 1 is me off stride, you know, out of stride and off to the left or off to the right, what's my number today? And if you want to live an effective life, and particularly if you're in a position of leadership, and we all are, and you want to be at your very best, you want to be coming from a place of at least a 8 and preferably a 9 or a 10. I just realized I am not recording. Hey, Simon. Okay. Sorry.
Hey, Paul, I'll interrupt real quick. Can we, yeah, for the purposes of this one, since we're doing combination of IDs drives, could those people who are willing put their change their last name to their ID number? It'll really help us everyone else understand where their comment comes from.
Okay. And I think you do that back in settings with the Zoom when you put your name in settings. But
You can do it now by going to your name and going to more, and you can change it then right now.
Perfect. Thanks, Greg. Thank you. Okay. If anyone finds that hard to, just when you start talking, you might just mention your name, or in the chat put your ID, so it's easy to then understand where you might be coming from, or easier. All right. So in terms of this slide I've shown before, these were some of the topics that people have asked to cover in the next 8 weeks. At the moment, what I've done is I've mapped out different sessions, but I'm really watching this session to see how this goes. And if, for example, there's a lot of discussion and we don't have enough time to cover the topics that are really important to people and you want more time on them, there is the room for us to do that again next week. I've had, so far I've got 8 volunteers of people who have said, I'd love to cover some of my own issues or situation in a live coaching session, partly for their own benefit, partly to help the group. If there's something that you would like to discuss online in one of the next 7 webinars, please let me know and I'll factor that in. I'll work with you beforehand to prep and make sure you're comfortable with everything, and then we'll include you in one of those sessions, and we'll see how we go. Okay, with that we've got today. So in terms of combinations, I just put up some examples here, particularly that for those of you who are new. I thought it might be easier to see the graphics here. But one of the combinations, I pulled out combinations that are really common and the questions we get asked a lot. So if you look at this first one over here on the left, people say, how can you be a verify completer? That sort of makes sense, but how could verify and avoid complete go together? Or looking at the next one, how can you be a verifier and also an improviser? They maybe understand the cautious mode of a verify, avoid, improvise, but how do these combinations work? And then the same over here with avoid verify. How can you be an avoid verifier as well as an avoid improviser, and someone else could just as legitimately be a verify and avoid improvise? And the same over here with, I get asked a lot, how can you be an authenticator, which they say is, the person that speaks the truth, and an improviser who's the person who just makes stuff up as they go along? How do those two go together? Pairing up is another area we can cover today. So if you've got an idea, like someone did ask the question, if I'm a 5843 and I'm working or living with someone who's a 5637, can that work? And if so, how does that work? So those sorts of questions we can cover today. The issue around intensities. So what's the differences between 6, 7, 8, and 9, or 4, 3, 2, 1? Or also, some people have got 3 drives going up. I've only got 1 drive going up, for example, like this person here on the right as a completer. What does that mean? How does that change things? And then lastly, 5s. What does it mean to be a 5? Like this person here on the left is 7553. So they've got 2 5s, and likewise, this person on the right has got 2 5s, different, authenticate and improvise. But what does that mean? So they're the sorts of topics that we're looking to cover today. And I can start speaking to any of these, but I first of all want to give you room to ask your questions. So I'm going to stop showing the slides and come back to you guys so we can just start our interaction. Take a screenshot if you want to have this in front of you. All of these slides will be posted on our website later today.
I have a question, Paul.
Okay, Judy, nice to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you. I love these sessions. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Good.
Now, I had a really big aha last week, which was totally unexpected, because I have been concentrating on the fact that I am a huge completer, and that's where all my energy's been. And when you talked about not improvising, avoid improvising, being someone who might have difficulty promoting themselves.
Yes.
Huge aha. I never, because I had so much energy on the complete, of course I'm going to complete this. Of course I'm going to do this. What's wrong with me? Why can't I get it done? And when you mentioned that I might have difficulty promoting myself, it just took a whole big weight off my shoulders. And so I began to think about, well, if it's not natural for me to promote myself, I'm going to have to find a way to do it that just doesn't come naturally. So that, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to share because it was such a big aha.
Well, thank you for sharing. You're doing a pretty good job so far.
I'm doing a pretty good job so far with promoting myself.
Right, right. I mean, just the sharing. I remember going to a Tony Robbins webinar, or not webinar, but a big live workshop one time, and he said, stand up all the people who hate public speaking. And so there's probably 1,000 people stood up, and he said, stay standing if it's like the fear of God, or fear of death, but worse than the fear of death. And there were probably like 50 people that kept standing. And he's like, is there anyone who gets sick and can already feel this sickness? And he got it down to the point where there were like, a dozen people, let's say, that were absolutely beside themselves for standing up. And he said, pass the microphone to this person over here. And all of a sudden, this person is talking in front of like 3,000 people, oblivious to the fact that they were actually speaking in public, And after about 20 minutes, he's like, so what are you doing now? And, sometimes it's when we think about it that makes it worse, right? But what you're just sharing now, even just contributing and sharing your thoughts, your feelings, and doing it authentically, the two key words are authentically and vulnerably. That will always, I have a saying that says, vulnerability builds rapport. And you don't want to self-promote in a false way, but if you share vulnerably and authentically, it will build the rapport that is very close to, what an improviser would call self-promoting.
So right there, I have no difficulty with being vulnerable, with speaking in public. That feels very natural to me.
Yeah. It's a notion of promoting yourself. And I think if you just, it's the talking about yourself. It's a lot of people with your idea will say, I find it easier to talk about others. It's when I've got to talk about myself. I did say to you last week, I haven't yet found, a magic strategy that I can say, here's what everyone else has found works. I would love to find one. It's one of those vulnerabilities that everyone with the Avoid Improvise ID really relates to, and doesn't seem to have a way of necessarily conquering. I remember Greg's put it in the chat here again today. If some people feel like they're just informing or educating or teaching, as opposed to promoting, but to your point, that's also got a different slant. It's not talking about yourself and necessarily promoting, but if you're telling stories, I'd say focus on, the closest I've seen is focus on storytelling and sharing that with others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about what's on your mind. Those of you who'd like to understand your own ID. Let's start with your own ID, first of all. If there's things about, your various drives and how they work together, or someone that well, that you're maybe living with or working closely with, and you want to understand the combination that person has. Because in the past, the last 8 weeks, I've only described them drive by drive, not combining together. Remember, if you're on mute, you have to take yourself off mute.
Yeah, I can probably talk to this. I've had an interesting relationship with one of my supervisors that I think is, I think the issue is that we just don't really communicate. And I don't really know specifically where the mismatch is, but I suspect the key is somewhere inside of our instinctive drives. I'm a 7.563. Let me get his. He's a 6.726, and it's one of those things where it seems like he invites people to give opinions about performance and things like that. But then when you do, he reacts in very bad ways. So I'm suspecting I'm not approaching him properly when I give those criticisms. For example, I don't think he realizes that he does it, but it seems to be an issue, and I've been trying to unravel where this communication gap is. There's some blockage between the way that we talk to each other that never quite been able to figure out. Do you have any insights between those two?
Do you have a sense of what it is, Anthony?
I try to be very generous. I mean, I don't want to, the suspicions that I have are all fairly negative, and I don't want to presume negative thoughts about somebody, because I know everybody's trying to do the best they can given the resources they have. So I don't, want to disparage this person, because I know they're doing the best they can. And I'm really not sure particularly what it is. This person is very, very used to people kind of towing the line, and I don't think he's used to hearing criticism. So even though he would like to be, and probably thinks he is a person that's open to constructive criticism, in reality, he doesn't seem to respond well to it at all.
Okay. Okay. Well, he's certainly not on his own there. And you say his ID is 6726.
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, yeah. So the first thing we do when we look at someone's ID to sort of try and figure something out for them, we look at their strongest drives rather than even their whole ID. And his strongest drive is the 2 in complete. So that means he's got, when you're going to raise something with him, there's just a very short amount of attention that he's got for you until he moves on somehow. Moving on typically would be to respond to you. So you might only have the sentence halfway out of your mouth and he's already reacting, and to you, I noticed your idea is, you said 7563. It's on the screen. It's got 7536, but I know it.
Yeah, it's 36.
No, it is 7563.
It's 36, sorry.
Yeah. So the difference there is that when you share something, you're probably wanting to give him all of the context behind it to understand it. And he's already reacting to what you're saying before you've had a chance to finish the context, So giving him the bottom line up front and saying, there's an issue I want to talk about, you and I, and how we work together. And I want that to be more effective so he can see straight away what it's about, and then worry about the context later. I'd get to that bottom line really quickly for him. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who's got an ID similar to 6726 that could say, well, if I was working with Anthony, here's what it might be for me. Has anyone got an ID like that? I'm just trying to scan as I look so you can sort of share the nuances of what might be more relevant. So I'm looking for like up, up, down, up, someone who's got an ID like that. What about someone else who's a 2? What about Laurie? What about for you? I see you're similar to that. Can you relate to that?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if someone like, so Anthony was just saying he's trying to work with, somebody who's 6726, and I see that you're 7626, so you're very similar in your ID, and he finds that person, says they might want feedback, but they really react pretty quickly and negatively to the feedback.
Mm.
How might that be you?
So I think that if it's too detailed, I probably don't want to get into all the details. I probably don't want to know all the back history. Just what's the issue? Let's get it resolved. So more GSD, get shit done, as opposed to let's look back at the history of man from the beginning of time. I'm not that interested in all that. So it's just, where are we at now? What do we need to do? And I think it's timing too. So sometimes bringing in sort of that big issue, it's timing, because if there's a lot on the plate and a lot going on, it's like, okay, well, we've got to get that solved, but how do we balance all of it? So I think that the focus is more on solving as opposed to not solving, but not wanting all the details.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good reassurance. So I would just suggest you maybe think about where all this is going to and what do you really want, Anthony, and maybe put that right up front. Certainly someone with a 6726 ID is more interested in the future and where this is going and how to make that more constructive, useful, effective. They're all the authenticate words that they would, want to see come from this, rather than just understanding. Talking so that we understand each other is probably more in the verify space. but to someone who's a 6726, this has got to have some sort of useful outcome. So what are we going to be doing differently as a result of this? So if you want me to do something differently, like, tell me that up front and let's talk to that.
Oh, just one last thing. I always start with the big drive first. So he's got that 2 there. So he's probably already worked on this and he's in his mind over it. And now it's like you're revisiting it and your points minor, that sort of thing in his head maybe. And if he's got a goal for this and he's got to think it's finished, the way to get his attention is show him where it's not finished and it's not working. And you need his help to make it work. So you're not coming with a suggestion. You're going, hey, you know, we were doing this and this happened. What do you reckon? So that he needs to be helped with a new problem.
So that's excellent. So what you're hearing there, Anthony, from Greg, are some of the nuances, even down to the words, like the word help, and that you need his help, and that it's not working, because they're all the words that appeal to the authenticate drive as well. That, you know, you thought it, instead of saying that it was finished, so it's the nuance is it's not about whether it's finished, it's the fact that it wasn't working, and that it's not, I need your help to get it to work, you know. That gets his attention, because help is one of those sort of magnetic words for the authenticator.
Yeah, that's all really good. And let me just kind of, there were several things that Greg and you both said that really resonated here. And just for everybody else's, maybe this will be helpful. One thing, I do tend to be very wordy, and I recognize that. And one of the things that there have been many times when I've repeated something, and once you've gone over something once, he doesn't want to hear it again. So right. Even if I don't realize that, you know, 5 minutes later I bring something up again, he's way past it, and he actually has expressed quite a bit of frustration. Another thing that I tend to do, which I've recognized not to, is that when he gives me a task, I start going into troubleshooting mode, and I start thinking of, you know, kind of what are the things that can go wrong so that we can get in front of them and avoid them. And to him, that comes off as pushback. He thinks I'm trying to avoid doing what he's saying, whereas really I'm just trying to think of, you know, I'm strategizing already. And I've learned to just do that silently, not use my inside voice to do that around this person, because yeah, and again, it's a lot of detail that he probably just doesn't want to hear. He wants to give me the big picture, then go do it and come back with the results. So all of that you guys said really resonated. So thank you.
Well, and just share that with him. Just let him know I'm in. I'll do it. I'm good. I'm on it. Now I want to talk about the how, you know. Then he knows that any questions are not to do with trying to resist it. They're all around how to take it forward. Just because you are vulnerable to having these things in your head, but not sharing them out front. I'm working with a CEO at the moment doing some coaching, and he said to me, one of the biggest things I've gotten from the work so far is I didn't realize how implicit I was. And for my team, I need to be much more explicit. You know, he's got all the thoughts and everything in his own head. So getting them more out and sharing them openly with him might be a big help for him as well, particularly for an authenticator.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, who else? Who else has got a question about their ID, combinations of their own drives, or someone they know well? Okay, so I'm going to kick it off because I know there's a lot of verify and completers in the room. I'm just going to give you some examples of some things, and then it might provoke some more questions. So if you think about someone like verify, I had up the example before of a verify and a completer, or a verify and a void complete, because that's common to a lot of you. So as an example of how they work together, it's the verifier in you that wants to make a list. So putting the list together is a form of being almost like getting up in the helicopter and seeing what have I got on today? What have I got to do? And getting that organized. So the getting it organized piece in terms of making the list, that's a verifier trait. And I'm not saying the only people who ever do it are verifiers, but a verifier does it in order to get that helicopter view and see what I've got on and start to prioritize it. It's all part of the need to get in control, not to be in control of others, but to get your own life in control. But just because you make the list doesn't mean you're going to check the list off. You know, that's the checking it off is why a completer makes a list. So a completer doesn't make a list necessarily to prioritize it. A completer makes a list of something they can start putting crosses against and checking off. So it's quite possible that if you're a verifier, you make your list and you've got 25 things that have to get done. Oh, there's the number one thing I need to do. So you're really doing it to get organized and see where you need to start. What's the number one thing to start with? That's the verify, avoid, complete. But a verify completer is making the list and then needs, the key word, needs to follow through and complete that list. And whenever they haven't completed the list, they're not at peace. So whether that's finishing the day or whether it's going on vacation, they can't really relax until that list is finished. So that's the difference between, or one of the differences, just to help understand the combinations between a verifier and a completer and a verify and avoid complete. If you then extend it out to say verify and improvise or verify and avoid improvise, which I know is also true for a bunch of you, and there's a question that comes up a lot. Like people, I think, get, if you're a verifier, that's the drive that wants to think it through and weigh it up and analyze it. Well, that makes sense to be an avoid improvise because that's the risk averse drive. And by thinking it through as a verifier, you're avoiding the risk. So that combo makes sense. But if you're a verifier, how can you also be an improviser? Because if you're thinking it through and weighing it up and analyzing it, but you're also an improviser, well, that means you're a risk taker. So where do those two things fit together? And I would say, firstly, my idea is verify, improvise, but there are several people on this call. Jeremy, you're a 7 in verify and an 8 in improvise. Pam, you're a 6 in verify and a 7 in improvise. So it's really quite common that people, well, each combo is just as common, by the way. There's no domination one way or the other. But for a verify, improvise, it's basically we're thinking it through as the words are coming out of our mouths. There's so many times, like basically all day, when I'm talking, where I'll start to say something, and as the words are coming out of my mouth, I've got a different idea that's come in, and I'll change tack halfway through a sentence, for example. Or I'll think it through and go to do what I've thought through, but as I'm doing it, change it because some other idea comes into my head, So the two are bouncing simultaneously together. And it's not a source of stress at all. What would be stressful is to have the new idea come into my head and not do it, or to be acting purely off the cuff and not having thought something through. And there are times when I'll say to someone, I just need time to think. Yes, I'm good on my feet, but I need time to think. But I'm probably talking, seconds or minutes, or give me a quick bio break. And by the time I come back, I'll have thought it through. Thinking it through under pressure is something that works for a verify, improvise person, whereas thinking it through away from the pressure, like having overnight or a decent break where there's no pressure. And that doesn't mean that an avoid improviser needs a lot of time. They might just need nanoseconds as well, but what they need is no pressure. They need to be able to think about it without pressure. So you don't say to them, we'll go and think about it for 3 minutes and then come back, or 5 minutes, or while we've got the break, because now it's pressure. It means they've got to have it thought through by the end of the break. But if they can have an open-ended amount of time to just be able to get it done while they're thinking, it could be minutes or seconds, but they just need no pressure. So many of you would have had that experience when you come out of a job interview, and the minute you walk out the door, your mind just gets flooded with all the answers to the questions that you were just asked that you couldn't think of. And they were there for you within seconds. The difference was the lack of pressure. Okay, any questions or about what I've said, or Claudia, other combinations?
Well, it's another question in regards to the 5. There's a few of us, and I just wondered how that plays out with other IDs. How does it play out within itself and with other IDs?
Okay, so if I'll just use yours as an example, but there's a lot of you with 5s. It basically means that it's not a drive. So although we try to help you understand each drive, we explain features or attributes of each drive with, so for example, in your case, as a 5 in authenticate, we could say, well, that's the literal, if you're driven to use that drive, that's the literal side of you and the explicit side. If you are an avoid authenticator, then, excuse me, you're more implicit rather than explicit, right? So they're the attributes. But when you're a 5, it means there's no drive there to go either way. So you will demonstrate the behaviors or the traits of either direction. right? And it's what pulls it into place. So you're a strong verifier. So when it's the right thing to do, you know, to be literal or to be explicit, that's what you'll do. When the right thing to do as a verifier, or the priority is to be more implicit and diplomatic, then that's what you will do. So you'll go either side depending on what your other drives push into play. Whereas as someone like myself, I'm a 1 in authenticate. I am always driven to be implicit. And even when I'm being explicit, I'm still like 100% aware of delivering that message really sensitively so that it lands well for the other person. The drive is always in play. Like if you were a completer and you were trying to be flexible, for example, like if you're a 7 or 8 incomplete and you were trying to be really flexible, and you can be flexible and make changes, but in that moment, you'd still be totally aware of what else is on your list that you've still got to check off somehow, you know? Whereas a 5 incomplete would bounce, you know, and be flexible and do that more genuinely. And there's other times they want to stay with the plan depending on what else was driving them. So you can demonstrate the behaviors of either side when you're a 5, but you look to your strongest drives to what's going to kick that into play. I don't know if there's anyone that has the 5s who can relate to that and comment on that for themselves, or even how you see it playing out for your own life. It's really valuable if you share that, because it's the nuances of you sharing that helps other people really understand their own ID better.
No, it totally makes sense, because I guess in my work, I kind of need both. I need to be very analytical and verify a lot in regards to what's going on in organizations. Sorry, I'm a change manager and I work with culture. So trying to make sense of things and use that analytical side and actually then make it explicit is kind of important, but doing it in a diplomatic way is also important, because it can really stand on people's toes, particularly executives' toes. So, right. And I didn't know that, like I knew I could do that, but I didn't know that that was my instinctive drive as well. So that's actually really helpful to understand, because I can pick and choose now what I use and in which situation I use it in.
Well, and one of the things I find, I have a dear friend of mine on the call today, all the way from Toronto, who's a 5 in Verify. And, you know, I know there's a lot of people who are 5s in Verify who will say things like, I don't know that I probably default more to the avoid Verify side. Like honestly, I don't like all that detail 99% of the time. I tend to, if I could do what I want to do, I'd sort of skate pretty thinly through the detail, but I've got it there as sort of like at least a backup or a willingness to, if I've got to get into the detail and be more analytic, then I can be, you know. But if I sort of default, I tend to default more to the avoid than to the use side of the equation. And that might be true for some of you as well, for all the drives. You might say, look, as a 5 incomplete, I think of you, Grant, you know, as a 5 incomplete. You might say, look, mostly I probably default more to avoid complete. You know, I tend to, and maybe that's a function of the job you're in, or the landscape you're on, could be even at home, that, you know, I've got to bounce a lot. But if all you did was be avoid complete, or if all you did as a 5 in Verify, Steph, if you were like always just avoiding verifying and not into any detail, I think there'd be something missing. I think the feedback I tend to get from people who are 5s is that not only am I willing to go either way, I sort of need to play in both camps as well. Like I do need to be verifying and getting into detail some of the time, even though I tend to probably, well, I don't think of it as detail when I do it. I just think of it as I'm more passionate about it and I really like that topic. So I'll dive into the detail. When you feel like people are pulling you in and forcing you in, that's when there's a resistance. As a 5 incomplete, if all you did was bounce around and be really flexible and not feel like you were ticking a list off, they'd probably have some lack of fulfillment about it. But if all you did was stay with the plan all the time, that would lack fulfillment too, you know. So I think it's not just a willingness. I think there's a need to sort of bounce from one side to the other, but you might feel, depending on your environment, a default to a particular side of that, you know, either use or avoid. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the feedback I typically get from people. Do those of you who are a 5, do you tend to default one direction or another? Do you think? Grant, what would you say for you? You're on mute right now too. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Graham.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
So I've got a faulty PC at the moment. It's giving me all sorts of grief. Yeah, I think I might have even commented on this in one of the previous sessions, Paul, that absolutely for me, it's either what's required or what am I interested or passionate about. I made a comment in the chat section there that as to whether I go all in on completing things or whether I just create a list for the sake of getting started, but don't lose sleep if I don't complete the list.
Right.
And sometimes I actually think it's, I almost wonder if it's sometimes because I'm a Gemini and it's got nothing to do with drives and all the rest of it. But I clearly understand that it is this notion of being a 5, and it depends on what lights my fire as to whether I complete something or not.
Okay.
Well, my alarms are going off on this idea that we can be a 5 or not be something for that drive. We ought to remember that you're not driven to that, but it looks like it because your other drives are getting a need met. But we don't like choose we'll be this 5 or that 5 so much as it looks like that. Otherwise, people are going, "Oh, I'm a 5. I can be all the drives," And it's like, not a drive, son. It's just looking that way.
Yep. But I tend to find it's on reflection. If I think about a situation that I was in, as to why I wasn't driven to complete something, because I typically like to think of myself as action orientated to get stuff done, but doesn't necessarily mean I'm driven to actually complete something. I don't know if that makes sense, but it depends. It's not. I don't always get things done like I thought I would, if that makes sense.
Well, and remember, you just used a very important nuance, is that you get the thing done. When a completer is not only getting the thing done, they're keeping everything else done around them at the same time. That's that whole need for harmony. So they get everything done. They keep everything done. They're thinking about what's coming next and, that's got to get done. Whereas the avoid complete side is we all, every human can get something done, but it's the thing, the something done.
Yeah.
Completers keep it all done,
Yep.
Steph, welcome. What is it for you as a 5 in verify? Do you relate to one side more than the other? Do you find yourself tending to default more to the avoid side than the use side?
I'm not sure if I really default one way or the other, but I definitely resonate with what you said, that if it's something I really care about, that I'm more likely to get into the details about it. Right. So I definitely resonate with that. So if it's something that I don't consider as important, that I won't get as detailed or make a list or have any sort of structure towards how I'm going to tackle that thing. But if it's something that I'm really passionate about, then I definitely am pretty detail oriented and get into the nitty gritty about it. So
right. I've also
Paul,
go on. Was that?
Sorry, Paul. I would say being a 5 in verify, I can't identify with it at all, and think that it, our training or teaching about it, that it's no drive, is more valid to me, and that it's coming from one of the other drives.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe I'm confusing people here then, because I'm saying the same thing. It's more around demonstrating the behaviors or the traits of each direction,
Yeah, behaviors rather than a drive.
Right, okay.
It can be confusing, especially for those not too familiar with ID,
right.
And you start to own everything,
right,
and that can be a trap.
So I think it's a great point, Richard. So if you're like in Steph's case, but even in your case as an authenticator, so authenticators want to know how things work. And in the that passionate sort of zone of trying to understand how things work, you can dive into the detail and pull everything apart that looks to others like you're doing the detail mind of the verifier. But really where you're coming from is I'm just driven to understand how all of this works. Once I know how it works, I'm done. I can move on then. But until you understand how it works, there's a really strong passion to understand all the detail.
Hi, Paul. Just a quick comment on this. I would describe it, I have a 5 in complete,
yeah.
And I would describe it like I can observe the use complete or avoid completer drive, but I don't feel it. I don't feel it like they do. So there's no drive there. I can observe but not really understand because I don't feel what they feel.
Okay, that's a good distinction. Thanks, Prue. Nice to have you here too.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one to understand, because there are a lot of people, particularly when they've got two fives, like a 7553 or 5375, you know, an idea like that where it represents two drives, people, and we say there's no drive, I can almost see in their eyes, you know, times I feel like half of them's missing, you know, they're not like, whereas other people have got more drives. But what actually happens is it can make you easier to understand for others. Because if there's only two strong drives, like one use, one avoid, people understand those two drives. They've pretty much got you, you know, pegged. Like you're easy to work with that way. When people have got really strong drives, and sometimes all four drives are really strong, they've got to, you know, they've got to meet all needs of all drives. That can be more challenging to do that. And those of us who do have really strong drives, like I'm an 8-1-4-7, so the 8, 1, and 7 are really strong. You know, Michael, I think when you and I spoke on the, not Michael, Jeremy, sorry, spoke on the phone, it was like 7, 3, 3, 8. They're really intense, you know, like each direction of the drives. That makes it hard for people to work with you. It's what sets you apart and makes you stand out. And there's a time when that's great, but there's a time when that's lonely as well, or challenging to work with, live with, whatever, because of the intensity. There's nothing wrong with it. It's about, you know, firstly understanding it yourself, and then helping others understand that about you as well. And then it can work really well together. All right, any other combinations?
So Paul, I just wondered as well about that 2 5s. I think I tend to observe that there's blind spots for people. When you say easy to work with, yeah, perhaps a bit simple, but for them, working with others, they can be a bit at sea.
Okay, I'm not sure where
well, because they don't understand from a drive perspective. They've got some stuff missing for them. I think when you've got a particular direction of a drive, you can sort of get the opposite. You sort of, yeah, okay, I sort of get it. But when you've got a 5, you can't. So when you've got 2 5s, it can be, it's when you need to probably learn ID a bit more, so that because it isn't innate.
Okay. Or maybe that's what it is. Maybe they just need to learn more about it then, Richard. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so one of the questions that came up was working together. I want to make sure I cover this for the person that asked it. It was, if you're like 5843 and you're got to relate to someone who's 5637. Vera, I think you asked this question. Would you like to elaborate on it just for the benefit of the group, and then we can maybe try and help with, not just for you, but for others that might have this sort of situation as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is my first call. So, yes, what's driving me crazy about that profile is ever-changing plans. This is more from a personal relationship than a work relationship. But what I find it very difficult is that plans keep changing, and I'm struggling to adapt to that.
Okay. So the person you're talking about, just for everyone else's benefit, is a 5637, and you know, there's no what's the word? Nothing surer than the fact that a 5637 is going to be continuously changing their plans. Now, I know people on this call that are married to or have children who are 5637 or that style of ID. And I'm looking at, you know, someone now, Pam, you've been married to someone like that for almost 40 years, maybe, close on, and has a really beautiful marriage. So, I mean, one way or another has figured out a way to work with someone that is constantly changing. And although Pam has a different ID to you, Vera, it might be interesting to hear from people like Pam, you know, how have you gotten your head around the living with and working with someone where things are constantly changing? Because I can appreciate it must drive you nuts.
And if I may add to that, what is additionally driving me crazy is my need to understand why.
Understand why it drives you crazy, or why they constantly change their mind?
Why they are changing their mind, understanding the behavior. And I'm struggling with that a lot. Need to understand.
Great. So first of all, for everyone else's benefit, it's your strong 8 in authenticate drive that wants to understand things, that wants to understand how things work. And maybe even just understanding it might be enough to help reduce a lot of the stress for you, as opposed to having to do anything about it. Just understanding that nothing's wrong and that this is how that machine works, as it were, you know, that alone could be really therapeutic for you. It might be first, if anyone is a strong authenticator as well, that's, you know, been through something like this, helping Vera understand how to get to the point of, you know, knowing how it works. Why is the person doing that? And understanding something about yourself and how that works. This could be helpful to Vera as well.
Well, I share the first 2 drives with Vera, but not the last one. Vera, the main thing I'm thinking is your frustration is that you've got a picture of what the outcome's supposed to be. And then all of a sudden they've just thrown that picture out, and you've been structuring, preparing, and creating to that picture. And now they're saying, no, we're not building that now. And so what's going on for you is that you think everything's broken and it's all wrong. But so I would just slow down and go, okay, what's the picture now? And what are we doing? And then, can I finish something, please? Like, you can put your foot down every once in a while and go, can I just finish this before we change it? I need to know what we're building, as opposed to it looks like it's always, you can't get anything finished. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I noticed about myself that I prefer when things are not working and I understand why, than when they are working and I do not understand why.
Yeah, well, that's because you can work on something. I'm thrown when you say the word why. So how it's working, what it's going to do, what it's going to deliver is what you're gunning for. And this other person just coming up with a great new way to make it work better. So what you want to keep looking for each other is what's the common picture outcome you can both share. Let them work their way, you work your way, but you got to have an output point that you're both working through. Otherwise, you might want to feed them something different so they walk away.
This is a great situation here, Vera. So first of all, Greg, thanks for your input, because it's bang on. Actually, you sort of represent both here. You represent half of Vera, like the 8 and authenticate, but you also represent the person that's the challenge, in terms of the constant changing. But there's some interesting things here. So although it sounds like it's frustrating that they constantly change things on you, Vera, as if you're a completer, it's not actually the change. I would suggest to you that because of your being a 4 in complete, you're actually open to the change. It's what Greg said. It's the fact that the picture that you had in your mind is no longer the relevant picture. It's understanding, why is this happening? How does that work? Once you understand it, I don't think you'll be as frustrated by the constant changes, because you'll know how the machine works. And as you said, you'd rather have something go wrong, but you understand why that's happening, than have it go right and have no idea, So I think just understanding it is sort of 90% of the solution for you. And the short answer is, it's not even that they're changing their mind. It's that as they began the journey, there was a detour that popped up that they hadn't anticipated before. So picture that they're going from, Sydney to Brisbane. Well, probably not an example these days. Sydney to the border of Queensland is about as far as you can go these days. And on the way, whilst they said that's where they're going to go, but they didn't realize there was a detour coming up, or an attraction somewhere on the side, off the side of the road that they want to go and see. So it's not a change in their mind. They're still maybe even heading in the overall direction, but it looks like a change because they didn't say anything about it up front, as a completer might have done, because they might have anticipated all of those things along the journey. So it's not necessarily a throwing out of the whole picture. It's just some, side roads that appeared along the journey that they want to also incorporate. Or it might be a complete change because as they began, they realized that, oh, no, actually we need to be going over here now. But if you get them, as Greg said, just to help recreate the picture and keep adjusting the picture, you'd probably be much more okay with it.
Can I add a thought?
Thanks.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, so being basically I'm infinitely flexible and I spend my life improvising, but also coming from, I guess, a point of verification, and I guess being a boss, because I get a lot of people dealing with exactly your problem. I'm flexible and they want plans. So what I find it is trust. So and it's exactly what Greg said, but there comes a point when you can authenticate the trust in the person that is doing the task. And when you can trust them, you can stop needing them to provide the plan. You can essentially get to that same point that Greg was talking about, this common understanding there's an endpoint, a goal, but you can trust them to get there. That's essentially how I've dealt with it over time, is that I create a point of trust, and then they don't need the plan from me because I can't give it ever, literally. So anyway, that's my kind of thoughts on it.
Thank you. I'm not sure that this is so much for Vera around completion as much as it is around understanding why it looks like it's changing so much, you know. But that's good. Also, getting to trust is about meeting people's needs through their ID, you know. So that's the other part to this too. Vera, has this been helpful to you or is this
Yes,
still...
thank you very much. And this part about trust as well. I think it was a very good point.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for maybe one more if somebody has got something on their mind that they'd like to talk through in terms of either your own ID and the combinations or intensities.
Hi, Paul. I have a question, but I don't think it's super applicable to the group, so I'll try to make it more broad so it would be more applicable to the group so everyone can kind of learn from it. So obviously I'm in a bit of a unique situation. I'm quite young, I'm about to graduate, so I'm thinking about careers and kind of these really big decisions that are pretty ambiguous and don't have a clear-cut answer. So just to make it more broad, just like a big decision that doesn't have a clear-cut kind of like end solution or decision that needs to be made that's very easy to make. And that's causing me like a lot of stress and anxiety. So I'm kind of wondering with my ID, if there's any tactics or strategies I could use to help make this easier for me to kind of understand, because I think I have the authenticate. So this decision is easier for me to understand, but then also to come to a conclusion as well.
Right. So Steph, is the question around how to build the picture, like to determine what it is you're going to do so you can be clear on what sort of future you're trying to build? Is that the essence of it?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of what path to choose kind of coming off of this end of school.
Okay. So rather than the answer, I might get someone, you know, on the call who's got a similar ID, like who's another authenticator that can say, well, even if they're years into their career, how do they deal with the ambiguity of, you know, there's so many options to choose from, and which one how do I make some sort of choice and start to, you know, zone in on that and build my picture around that, even if it might change over time. Who do we have who's an authenticator? Maybe someone we've not heard from yet.
Can you hear me? This is Ilona.
Yeah, Ilona, great.
Hi. So Stephanie, I'm not exactly your ID pattern. I'm a 4827, but my son is 5833, which is close to you. And he's just graduating college now. And what we've really found to be helpful is that there are so many options out there, and he wants it to be this useful, you know, appropriate one. He's doing a lot of internships to try out what it really feels like, so it's not as theoretical. So that's really helpful. And he realized that what he wanted to do was do like an interim step. So he went and is going to coding boot camp because he knows that's going to help him no matter which direction he goes. And so that he can try those things out before he does that direction. So I don't know if either of those things are helpful, but.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've definitely tried to do that as well. I've had a couple of internships, but I'm still finding, I'm coming off a commerce degree. So obviously there's just a lot of choices that come out of it. Great choices, all of them, but it's just a bit more challenging because it's not so clear cut. So
right. And I think that the idea of clear cut for now, which will build on that skill set, is better than clear cut forever. right? It's the risk of not making a choice and putting a stake in the ground. You're avoid improvise. The risk of not doing it is actually bigger.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Steph, I would say when you've got your ID, when it's the right thing, if there is such a thing as one right thing, you know, like the right person to marry, the right job to get, it will stand out to you as the one, you know. And if it doesn't, if it feels like there's options, and like you just said, that there's lots of great choices, the truth is probably any of the ones that are the great choices, like let's say there were 3 or 4, any of them are probably equally of value for you to get started with. It doesn't mean that you'll stay with all of them, but even the one that you might start with today that is the right one, 3 years from now, you might have outgrown it, or something shifted, or the people you're working with change, or they get bought out, or some other change happens that causes that environment to no longer be the right one anymore for you, you know? So I would say if there are 3 or several that all feel right to you, the most important thing, as Alona was just saying, is to start with one of them that you can start experiencing, start making it real, start getting in amongst it and getting your hands dirty with, you know, something that you're moving and feel like you're being, you know, involved with. And then by doing that, you might also realize certain other things of not only, and it's not so much that you made a mistake that, you know, you chose the wrong one, but by doing it and learning, you might realize, oh, actually, you know what I really want to be doing? It's something that wasn't even part of the original plan. You know, it might be because the people you met there, they start sharing things with you and you go, you know what, there's a whole new area that I want to explore now that I wasn't even thinking about. But if I didn't take this job and meet those people, I would never have had those conversations that take me there. At the end of the day, life is truly a journey. And each of the people you meet, each of the things you experience are all part of the story of your journey, you know, that is building you. So if several of them feel right, I would say that the right thing is to start experiencing any one of those right things, you know, and it will then bounce you along to what's going to be best for you.
Thanks so much.
Plus, I know a really good business coach if you want to, and you know, I'm not referring to me. No, so it's maybe that will help you. I mean, because what Alona said about taking the risk out of it is the risk is in not experiencing. You know, if they feel good, kudos to you for finding several things that feel so good. Someone's going to be lucky to get you. All right, guys, we're at the top of the hour. Thanks for being on the call today. I will look at your feedback and send out a note later today or tomorrow on next week. And look forward to seeing you on the call again next week. These will be every week at the same time for the next 7 weeks is this particular series. And once we get past next week, they're going to be much more interviews where I've got people that have volunteered and we've got some really nice meaty topics to get into. I've already started interviewing some of the people prepping and there's some really going to be some fun discussions coming up. So I just want to allow the space next week in case there was flow over from this week's discussion, make sure we cover everything off. So I'll plan all that a little later and share with you what we're going to be covering next week. And I hopefully see you then. Otherwise, have a great rest of day or rest of week, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.